Okay, I think it's recording now.
Yeah, it is.
For 1.2, I had to evaluate a lesson, and so I just did one online. It was a third grade main idea lesson where the teacher had her students find the main idea and supporting details from a passage.
Okay.
And so one of the questions was the content affirming to the students' identities or diversity? And so I just wrote about how the content was affirming. The teacher always used very positive, encouraging language, and even when the student made a mistake, she would encourage them to learn from it instead of making them feel less than for not understanding or making a mistake. And at first she had them individually read the assignment, so she went around and was kind of asking questions one-on-one to make sure that each student was able to better understand what they were reading.
Okay.
One thing that was a little tricky with me was what assets did the teacher bring to the classroom instruction, so individual experiences, abilities, talents, culture, all that stuff. And so it was a little tricky for me because it was a science topic and they had to find the main idea about like toads and frogs and what they had in common and whatnot. And so one of the questions I would have for you is how would what assets could I better look for if it is a subject like math or science where it's kind of more quote structured than like an English lesson or social studies or something like that that can talk about culture and talents and community and stuff like that.
So let me see if I understand this. So the question was basically like, what did the teacher bring as far as her talent or um into this main idea lesson? Or how could she have related to her students? Is that kind of what it is? Is that
Yeah.
kind of what it's asking to? So just off the top of my head, some of the things, it's like she could maybe tell a story, like, about, frogs or like what it, so what comes to me is like right now, like my little girl knows that it's spring because she can hear the frogs in the pond across the street, so like or there was this one time that a frog jumped on her and she screamed, so like kind of making it just like relatable and personal to maybe introduce it, or does it like, and then if, I mean, obviously if you open it up to stories, there's no telling what you'll get, but also with that, if you're doing like frogs versus, was it frogs versus toads, like what's the difference, is that the main idea? So I mean, you can maybe start by doing like a quick game, or like what do you already know about frogs, or what do you think that the difference is, and like at the end, what grade was this for, third grade?
Yeah.
So like you could maybe have the kids write down on a piece of paper what they think the difference is, and then like at the end where you write, like, kind of like make it a game. So I think that there's different things that you could do it. Like as far as culture too, you could, um, you know, look for like different, I mean, like what comes to my mind, and this is just because I have some family from Louisiana, like they love frog legs, like they love,
Yeah.
like they love going out fishing for frog legs. So do kids even know that that's a thing, like in other areas, like that's a culture, that's a family dynamic, like that's family outings in other, areas of our country, like, so you could maybe tie stuff like that in together, to make it interesting for kids, because, sometimes our kiddos never leave Loudon. Like, they don't know what's
Yeah.
out there. Some of our kids have never, like, it still amazes me that there's kids that have never been to the beach or the ocean. I'm like, it is 6, 7 hours away. Like, it still just amazes me. Knoxville, like some of our, I mean, I had a high school student who literally got on the interstate one day and was like, "What is this?" Like, he was in 8th grade. He was an 8th grade student, but the principal was telling me as he was a high school student, he was like, "I put him on the interstate to take him to football practice." And he was like, "What is this? I don't know what this is." I'm like, "It's an interstate," you know? And so I think
Yeah.
that just exposing kids to things that they don't know, because to us, that might seem normal, but to some of our kids, they don't know what's out there. So I think just kind of looking at, even if it seems trivial, you've probably got a few kids that don't even know what that is. So
Right.
relating it to your experiences, relating it to your stories, tapping into the cultures that's just in our country, in our, in our area. So
Okay. Yeah, so just making it a little bit more relatable and
mhm.
also that they're engaging more, and that way it's a little bit more affirming to
Yeah.
each student in the class.
And like, this is not related necessarily to, frogs, but like for math or like for science and social studies, for example, when I taught in the self-contained behavioral class, our kids got very frustrated, and it would lead to behavior problems if their
Mhm.
answers weren't correct, or they had to go in blind to answering a question. And one of the things that I would do when I was introducing new topics, whether it was vocabulary or a topic about, you know, a war or something like that, I would have them, and with our firewalls, it's a lot safer than them going in blindly. But I would have them Google like a vocabulary word, and they would have to pull up a picture. What picture do you think would go with that word? And there's hundreds of images or whatever, and me and my paras would kind of like circulate the room to make sure they weren't on anything, and they would have to pull up the picture, and they would have to tell about it, like,
Yeah.
and they'd have to become experts. And then as we studied, they would keep that picture up, and as we read the story or, went through the topic, I would ask questions like, well, what do you think about that picture? Like, do you think the way you explained it was accurate? Is that an accurate depiction of that picture? And it just was allowed them to have a safety net, kind of, because they weren't going in blind and like having to, come up with the answer themselves. And but it also gave them that ownership too. So like, you could do something like that as well as you're introducing like science or
Okay.
informational text. My kids love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, that honestly answered my other question. What was like,
Oh,
what was one thing you would be to like recommend whenever you are bringing in a topic where like kids may not have as much prior knowledge to or something
mhm.
like that. So perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that worked out great. But yeah,
Yeah.
that one saved and like, I wouldn't want them obviously going out on their own blindly Googling it, but our firewalls are, safer
Hmm.
here. And then, like I said, I could circulate the room, and being in a self-contained setting, I had two paras that would help me. Like, you take this chunk of the room, I take this chunk of the room. But it worked on so many skills, but allowed them to not have to come up with everything on their own. It was kind of provided for them. So,
Right. Well, awesome. Okay. Um, the last like two questions
mhm.
of the um assessment was, what did the culture of the room look like? The physical space, were there social affirming items in the classroom? I said that in the classroom they had pods that the kids were sitting in, so they did their individual reading. And then she talked to them a little bit about it. And then for the supporting details, she had them collaborate in their pods together um, to agree more on the supporting details, or if one of the students in the pod was struggling a little bit, the other kids helped them get a better idea of evidence from the text for that. And
Okay.
she had visual aids on the board that showed like a frog on one side and then a toad on the other, and it also kind of described a few of the differences and similarities. um, and then also she was calling on different students the entire time. That way each student would get the opportunity to participate, because I know sometimes like there will be one kid in the classroom that wants to answer every single question. And, as great as that is, you still want other students to be able to participate and
Mm-hmm.
let them discuss like what they've learned or what they found and stuff like that. And then how did the students interact with each other? Did their interactions appear to be respectful and healthy? Like I said, when they were discussing in their pods the supporting details for the main idea, all the students were really respectful to one another. If one of the kids had a supporting detail that didn't really align with the main idea, the student would be like, oh, well, actually, there's a better one that I think I found, instead of just, being negative and
Oh,
belittling
that's
them.
good. Yeah.
Well, that's wrong,
Yeah.
Um, and so they were helping one another even go back to the text to better understand the supporting details, and just they constantly used encouraging language with one another. And I think since their teacher used a lot of positive and encouraging language with her students, they also adapted that with one another. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
is um, really amazing, because I feel like you don't always fully understand the impact you have on teaching until you see like how your kids interact with each other and how they talk to themselves
Mm-hmm.
and um, kids in the classroom. So yeah, that was all for 1.2.
Okay.
And then I'm going to stop recording.